If you want to follow along, I recommend this dbfiddle website. It's a free website and you don't even need to create an account. When you open the website, just click on SQL Server, that's the flavor of SQL that we're using for these videos, and make sure you choose AdventureWorks as the database. That will give you access to all of the same sample data that I'm using in these videos.
Today we're going to be talking about operators in SQL. And this should be nice and easy because the operators in SQL are just like the operators in Excel. So let's quickly remind ourselves, what can we do in Excel? Well, let's say we can do things like addition. That would be the plus sign is the addition operator. So we can do something like 2 plus 3. And just so that we can keep track of what we've done so far, I'm going to use the formula text function just so we can keep track of what we've done. So that's the addition operator. Easy peasy. There's also the subtraction operator. We can do 2 minus 3. Easy peasy. That's addition, that's subtraction. What else? We can do multiplication, 2 times 3. And what's the last one? We can do division, 2 divided by 3. All exactly what we expect. We know these, we're familiar with these, we use these all the time. Can we do this with SQL as well? Of course we can. So let's do exactly the same as what we've done on the left with SQL on the right. So let's do exactly the same thing. So this time I'm again not going to bother with a from statement, we're just going to be writing these straight away. So we can do 2 plus 3. We can do 2 minus, let's run these as we go, just so we can prove that we're getting what we expect. Here we go. Let's give this a name so we can keep track of it. So I expect this one to be 5. Cool. Yeah, so that's worked. 2 plus 3 is indeed 5. Then what about 2 minus 3? This is 2 minus 3. I expect this to be minus 1. Let's give this a run. Absolutely. Let's try multiplication. 2 times 3. This should give us 6. Absolutely. And finally, 2 divided by 3. This should give us 0.6 recurring. Yeah? Ooh. What's going on here? So Excel's absolutely fine with these ones. And these ones will pretty much always be fine. But what is going on here? Well, let's try another one to see if we can spot what's going on. What if I was to do, let's say, 5 divided by 2? What would that would usually give us 2.5. What's it going to give us this time? Gives us 2. So what's happening here is it's forgetting about the decimal place. 0.66666 blah blah blah. Forgets about the decimal place and just gives us 0. 2.5 forgets about the decimal place and just gives us 2. So this ties in with our last video about data types. SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, the SQL flavor that we're using for these videos, when it comes to division, some of the choices it makes are a bit weird, and it's because of the data types. Either side of the division, in fact all of them, but either side of the division, we've got a whole number, we've got an integer, and another whole number, another integer, which means that the value we're going to get back is a whole number, is an integer. Excel's not done this. Excel knows that even if we're dividing an integer by another integer that could give us a decimal, we want to see the entire decimal. We need to be explicit with SQL and tell it that that's what we want to see in this scenario. And we've got a few options for what we can do. So let's jump into that. Just going to give myself a bit more space. So we'll just focus on the 5 by 2 for the time being. In the last video, in the video about the data types, we saw that we could use the cast function to convert anything to anything. So more or less. So in this case, if we've got integers and we want to see a decimal point at the end, we need a decimal in there somewhere. We could convert both 5 and 2 if we wanted, but we can get away with just one of them. So if we convert the 5 into a decimal, let's say we're going to have 2 decimal places. Remember, the 5 is the total number of digits that we want to see in the number, and 2 is the number of digits that we want to see in the decimal place. So we now have converted 5 to a decimal. Now if we divide it by 2, we'll get rid of the names for now. What are we going to get? Now we get 2.5. And in fact, when SQL does division with decimals, it doesn't actually respect the 2 at the end when you do it before the division. So it's gone and it's given us a 9 and a 6 instead of a 5 and a 2 for whatever reason. This is probably going to be your preferred method to explicitly cast, because rather than using 5, it's more likely that you're going to be using an actual column. So let's just see what this would look like with an actual column. Let's go back to using the department table. We like the department table. For now, let's just focus on the department ID, because we know that that's just a bunch of integers. What if we do the same thing here? What if we were to do department ID divided by 2? Every time it's an odd number, it's rounding down. So this is the place where we could cast department ID as decimal. Again, I'm going to choose 5.2, but we know that after the division happens in SQL, SQL is going to change the output. In this case, it's changed it to 9.6 again. But now we actually get the decimal places, or the numbers in the decimal that we expect. So this is one option. We can explicitly cast at least one side of the division sign. What I'm going to do next, rather than explicitly cast our numbers to decimal, we can, and then divide them by 2, we can just go ahead and divide by 2.0. This might look a little bit weird at first. So let's set this up just so we can see what it looks like. Do the same down here. So let's just type it out. This department ID over 2.0. This looks a bit weird because, well, 2.0 and 2, well, that's the same thing. But actually, this is how we can tell SQL that we want to treat this as a decimal and not as an integer. We want SQL to understand that we want some decimal places rather than just forgetting about them. So let's run the top one first to see what this gives us. We get 2.5. Again, this time it's given us 8 and 6, numeric 8.6. What about the department ID version? If we give this a run, we get the same output. And this time it's given us numeric 12 and 6. But it's still given us the decimal places. That's the important thing here. We can, if we're doing the division with a number that we decide, it's always safer to do 0.0 on the end to be really clear to SQL that we want some decimal places. You could put loads of decimal places if you wanted. It's not going to make a difference. As long as you've got just 1.0 at the end, it's going to give you what you want. The last approach that I'm going to take us through is a bit of a cheat. I only do it if I'm just messing around and doing things quickly. I don't like to use this for when I'm like publishing a query that I want to run long term. I'll just do it when I'm just messing around with some data. And it's more appropriate for when you're doing one column divided by another column. So it's not really appropriate for either of these cases, but we'll show it anyway just so that you can see it going forwards. The cheat is actually really similar to what we've done here, combined with what we've done here. If we were to try and do 5 divided by 2, we can just whack in a 1.0 times at the start. So 1.0, well, this is just 1, but we're telling SQL that we want some decimal places going on. So if we do the 1.0 times 5, it's not going to change the 5 in terms of the value that it has, but this is a cheat to say that we also care about the decimal part of the 5. And then we can go ahead and divide it by 2 like normal. So if I give this one a run, what are we going to get? We still get 2.5. We could do the same thing with columns. And like I said, this is what I'll typically do if I've got one column divided by another one, because I can't explicitly add the 0.0 on the end of whatever I'm doing, whatever's in the numerator or denominator at the top or the bottom of the division. We can instead do 1.0 times department ID over 2. This 1.0 times department ID is going to make sure that everything in our department ID is given a decimal part without actually changing the values that are there. So let's give this one a run and see what we get. We get the decimal parts that we expect. Perfect. So again, this is a bit of a cheat, but it can be a little easier to write than all of this. So it's up to you. My recommendation is be explicit, but you can get away with this if you're in a rush. Now, one point that I want to make really, really, really clear, because this does confuse some people, is that you have to do this conversion before the division. You can't do this conversion after the division. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll sometimes see people try and do this. Cast, we'll do 5 divided by 2 first, and then we'll convert that into a decimal. Okay, we'll choose 5, 2. I'm just going to hide these for now. What's this going to give us? Well, this still gives us 2. We've told SQL to care about the decimal places after the damage has already been done. It's already done the division. It's already done 5 divided by 2 and forgotten about the decimal part by the time we ask it to now care about decimals. So don't do your casting on the outside if you need to make sure that you're keeping the correct decimals. You've got to do your casting on either side of the number. On the number either side of the division. You've got to tell SQL, keep the decimal places before you do the division. Because doing it after the division, well, the damage is already done. This was a nice and short one today, but let's just quickly wrap up. We saw that SQL has exactly the same operators as Excel. We can do addition, we can do subtraction, we can do multiplication, and we can do division, but we need to be careful about division. If we're dividing two whole numbers, then we've got to make sure that we tell SQL that we want one of them to be a decimal first. So that's either by using the cast function, cast to a decimal, and I'll just choose 5, 2 for now. Then we do the division. We could, if we have control of the numbers, we could explicitly point a 0.0 on the end of one of them. That'll tell SQL that we care about the decimal places. And if we're feeling lazy, we can do 1.0 times the first one divided by the last one. All three of these approaches are safer ways to do division because we're telling SQL to remember the decimal places, not to just forget about them. That's all for this time. I hope you found it useful, and we'll catch you in the next one.